All right, everybody, we are here. Just got home from work, bullets jumping all around the house, so we know we're getting started. This guy we met the other day, I was talking to him in my office, not in person, but he called me and we had a nice conversation. And he's just trying to spread awareness and talk about where he's come from and how he got to where he is now. And I always appreciate that because so many people. I did a TikTok video on this the other day, just about like taking your mask off and revealing not only to yourself but to the world like who you really are, and not hiding or putting filters on, just being who you really are meant to be and who you actually are inside. And scars, whether they're metaphorical or literal scars, just revealing them and saying, you know what, judge me if you want, but this is who I am. I always appreciate that in people because it's not done enough. I don't think authenticity and just realism is appreciated and respected enough these days. And, especially when talking about subject matters like we're about to get into, like mental health and addiction. They're two things that people tend to judge off bat. But a lot of these people have been somebody one way or another, and just they succumb to whatever it is, their demons in one way or another. And it takes them down a path that they never foresaw, unfortunately. And, it brings the ugly out of them, but it doesn't mean they're not a good person deep down. It's just circumstances, unfortunately. So anyway, either way, he's still a good guy and he's here to tell his story. So yeah, buddy, you want to tell us your name and a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Logan Hufford, up here in Alaska. And I'll just start out by saying I'm no longer in bondage to sexual addiction. And those are not words that I take lightly.
Sure.
8.5 years ago, the idea that I could say I'm no longer in bondage to sexual addiction would be completely unfathomable. Like, I literally, given where I had gotten myself in life, the type of habits and routines and just ways of interacting with the world around me had gotten so messed up and just so completely destructive. Sure. That I couldn't envision a life that was not that was not just me constantly hurting others. Right. I'm very blessed to be able to say those words now and have a life that's completely transformed from that.
Sure. Now, can you tell us like what it is for you, what a sex addiction is? And I ask this because there are a lot of times that guys get caught cheating and whatnot. Let's say Tiger Woods, for instance. He went on a rampage and he was just having sex with all kind of women. And some were kind of trying to say, is it a sex addiction? And a lot of guys try to say, no, it's just he just likes to bang a bunch of girls because he's Tiger Woods. But I think he did have, and I don't think every guy who goes around banging girls has a sex addiction, but it's the way he was going about it. It seemed like he desired it, and he just made dumb decisions on the behalf of the addiction. Like he could clearly obviously have sex with whoever he wanted, but he was taking a lot of risk to do it, almost like he was addicted. But like anyway, like that's just an example. But for you, what do you consider like a sex addiction as far as how you went about it?
Sure. And I will definitely be talking about, things from my perspective, using a lot of I statements for sure. Yeah. And part of that is practical. I know my story. I know what's in my heart and what was in my heart, and I can't speak for other people, right? But right. But also just from, not to be like legalistic, but part of my recovery process, part of how we do things in the recovery program that I lead now is like, it's a lot of extreme ownership. It's a lot of, hey, I'm not here to talk about what you or they or we or is like, what do I need to work on?
Right.
And so I don't talk a lot about, other folks and what they've got going on. But yeah, I completely take your point. And of course, I'm a human. So sometimes I have thoughts like, man, like, yeah, whether it's literally Tiger Woods or just, maybe a loved one, a family friend, like, oh, something happens, like, oh man, wonder what they got going on. Wonder what they're struggling with. Wonder if it's this. I have thoughts like that sometimes for sure.
Yeah.
For me, and just to clarify, so, when I say no longer in bondage to sexual addiction, or another way to put it, like for 7.5 years, I would say I'm Logan and I'm a recovering sex addict. And I don't get too caught up in like the labels of like recovering versus healed versus no longer in bondage. There is a specific reason why I use the verbiage I do now, no longer in bondage. But to say sex addict, it's not an addiction to sex itself, which is one thing I always clarify. It's an addiction to chasing the high that I would get, the hit that I would get from, in my case, sexual deviancy.
Like an adrenaline rush type of thing.
100%.
Right.
100%. So, started out with pornography. In fact, I mean, technically, the way that most people would define pornography didn't even start there. It started out with pictures when I was like 9 years old, pictures in JCPenney clothing catalogs of women in lingerie and underwear. So like, the average guy in the street's not even going to call that pornography, right? Like, but to me, that was my first introduction to that world of
Well, how old are you?
Objective. I'm 33.
Right. So we're around the same age. And so like for the average person out there, porn wasn't like readily available like it is now. And you had to have
there were no iPads floating around and iPhone. I mean, right. Exactly. It was dial-up internet.
You had to have like a chip box to get like the illegal channels. And if you didn't have that, and even when you did have that, eventually the cable companies cut down on that. They would put like a little clamp down and would block all the channels that you're not paying for. And then like Xfinity and all that came around, and then everything was just paid. And then the internet eventually exploded where they just opened up and the internet became more broad, and well, porn was everywhere. And
and the other thing too with my specific upbringing was like I was raised in a home. To be honest, man, I was raised I was very blessed. I was raised in a very loving, very safe home.
Sure.
And part of that was, we were pretty darn conservative family, like pretty sheltered. So, I mean, for one, late 90s, it wasn't necessarily easy for anyone to access porn if they were, a kid or whatever, but especially in my home, like best believe there were no Playboys laying around, there was nothing laying around. It was, but again, I didn't need a Playboy laying around, just like I didn't need, in my personal story, like there's no trauma, there's no abuse, there's no incident that like drove me to anything. Yeah. I had an incredible family around me, loving me, supporting me. Not perfect, but there was never a day in my life where I felt unloved or unsafe, and yet I still trained myself eventually to chase after the high, the feeling that I would get that came from, looking at women that I would objectify, which again started there, went to eventually, hardcore porn, sure, videos, masturbation to that. And then eventually, once I was really insecure, really, really shy around girls for my whole upbringing, always felt I was ugly, always felt like a girl wouldn't like me, that kind of thing. And so I didn't really try anything with girls, for the most part, like first 19 or 18 and a half years of my life. Right. And summer of 2019, I grew up in Alaska, went down to Houston, Texas, and worked down there. So I was away from my family, away from that structure, right? Away from being relatively sheltered, away from the support, whatever that looks like. And that, I call that my prodigal son moment, because it was like, okay, now I'm starting to party. I'm starting to have interactions with girls and mixing things like mixing alcohol with girls, drugs with girls, all these different things.
Sure.
And just completely, literally looked for opportunities to go off the deep end, looked for opportunities to just do everything that I, thought was cool that I couldn't do before. And amazingly, it's seriously amazing that like I didn't have terrible things happen to me in terms of like that I didn't die, wreck my car, get arrested. Like just the amount of the amount of risk that I took down there is crazy that I was able to make it back to Alaska, but I did, and basically went back to being like the good boy, living with my family again. I'm 19 years old, living with my parents, so still like not a lot. Like I'm not sneaking out at night. I'm not having girls come over. Like I'm pretty sheltered still. But I met at work. I met this young lady who would become my wife, and we got to know each other. We started dating, and during that time, I still struggled with pornography, and I didn't like that I looked at it. I didn't like that I masturbated to it, and I tried to do it less. And I did do it less, but like emphasis on less, not, it didn't go away. But I was focused on her. So in my mind, like, I'm doing good. Like, I'm not, like, I never cheated on anyone. I would never cheat on anyone. But in reality, these things that I had started, these routines and habits and muscle memories that I had started from the age of like 9 had only been building. And, you know, to the external eye, they were mostly invisible. They were mostly internal, because I wasn't doing stuff with other people really. And that all changed about a year before I got married. Was dating my wife. I believe. Well, I think we're engaged at this point, I believe. And I cheated on her for the first time. And once that happened, once that dam broke, it was just complete. Everything that had been building, everything that I had been doing to myself internally, just all exploded, and it was external now. And like, once that dam broke and I broke that barrier, that was the high. That was the biggest high that I've ever gotten.
Now you slept with another woman.
Correct. And so now I wanted more of that. I wanted more sexual contact with other women. And so, I mean, the porn stayed throughout. The flirting, you know, just only increased and was more rampant with every woman that I would come across. But yeah, I started having countless affairs, hookups. Eventually got to the point where I started hiring prostitutes, and it was a complete horror story. From 2010 through the next 5-6 years.
Yeah. No, can I ask? I know this is kind of personal, but like, were you still having sex with your wife? Because sometimes, because I know, you know, regardless, if you have an addiction, you have addiction. You're going to chase the high. But sometimes people, and I mean, obviously she's still with you, so she's obviously a good one to keep. But I mean, sometimes women tend to say, no, I'm not putting out, I'm not, you know, or they're just less sexual than the guy, and maybe they're compatible on all levels, and then they're not having sex, and the guy's like, well, okay, I'll get it elsewhere, and then the addiction kicks in. But if you're actually having sex and she's reciprocating to everything you need and you're still doing it, then yeah, that's truly just the addiction.
Yeah. And that was absolutely, with me, there was no gray area. It wasn't like, oh, you know, she tried to be a good wife, but she still, you know, she really struggled with loving me, and wasn't like, no. She did everything she could to be like the perfect wife. She, that is not to say that's what she should have done. I mean, that's something I'll get to later. It's like, she responded with what she felt like she should be doing. And part of what we learned, part of what she learned, because she's been in her own recovery journey, is, okay, what does it actually look like for a woman to be healthy in their response to a man that's doing that stuff? So I'll get to that later, but
sure. I have a question for you.
No, I mean,
which is kind of like a side thing, but it's something I want to know, and it because you hear people say they have a sex addiction, they have a porn addiction. Is there really a difference? Because I really don't know, but I mean, obviously, I would assume porn addiction is a part of the sex. I mean, you could basically have a porn addiction without going out and having sex with other people. You could just spend hours and hours on the internet. But I mean, if you have a sex addiction and porn, are they separate? If you're out doing both, are they like, are they in separate categories, or is it just, if you have a sex addiction and you're masturbating to porn a lot, it's just saying, oh, it's just like a branch of the sex addiction?
Absolutely the latter.
Okay, gotcha.
A porn addiction is sexual addiction. Okay. Now, have I heard plenty of guys differentiate between the two and say, oh, I'm not a sex addict, I struggle with porn? Absolutely.
Sure.
And okay. I'll tell you right now, do I think that a big part of that is them trying to feel better about it and not feel like, oh, I'm not one of those?
Yeah.
I absolutely think that that's what it is.
Okay.
I'll circle back to where I was.
Sorry about that.
But no, you're good. You're good. So, because it's super relevant to this point. So, I mean, I've given you like the super zoomed out version of where this took me, right? Just how far it took me. Mm-hmm. I basically, I played out all of the fantasies that I'd had from this early age. I played them all out over the years. And yet my mentor, who ended up walking with me through recovery, he's a guy, he's an older guy. He's about my dad's age. He's a man who, he had decades of sexual addiction. It was purely pornography. he never had sexual contact with a woman outside of his wife. And like hearing that, it might be easy, like, well, how would a man like that be able to like walk with me? Because we had such different stories. And yet there was not a single moment where he gave me feedback or asked me questions or held me accountable where I was like, well, what, you don't understand where I'm coming from. That never came across my plate.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it manifested differently. And yet it was like two creatures that, like, you know, they look different, but their DNA is basically the same. That's kind of what our addictions were. Like, yeah, they manifested differently. Our addictions flowered differently. And yet we struggled with the same stuff. We struggled with the same holes that we're trying to fill. We struggled with the same highs that we were chasing. We just chased after them differently, but it was the same addiction.
Sure.
So yeah, I mean, porn, I don't pull back one bit. In my opinion, you know, porn is absolutely a form of infidelity. I'm picturing myself having sex or doing sexual things with that woman. You know, so for me, I mean, it's absolutely, it's the same bucket. Like you said, it's different branches on the same tree. But it's all that same tree.
Now, what if it's like, and again, this is going deep into it, but so be it. It's an unfiltered podcast. So what if it's like a couple and they're like, hey, we want to watch a porn video and we want to act out everything in the porn together. You're still watching two people that aren't you, but I mean, you're doing it together. Because it's like for me, because one of the questions I wanted to ask you the other day, whenever we did this is, you know, as a person, because obviously I know porn is out of the question for you. It's like there's a lot of people who can smoke weed or can have some wine, but if you're an alcoholic, you can't have wine, or if you're a complete drug addict, you can't do anything. So, like, I get it. Like, obviously watching porn for you is bad. Now, like, but what if you know, you have a teenage boy, he wants to masturbate to porn. Obviously, you know, you don't know what DNA you know, his DNA he has of yours, because, you know, he might become a sex addict. But the average teenager watches porn all the time. And I mean, some of it could be harmful for sure, how they treat women and all that. But like for me, take me, for instance, I'm 35. I'm single. From now and then, from time to time, I mean, I've watched porn most of my life since I was 12, but like, I watched it a lot more when I was younger. Now, because I've spent more time with girls, and, you know, I can separate the difference. But in general, like, I don't think porn is, I think it's unhealthy to some degree for sure. And that's why I've cut back, because you start to see certain images and you want to act out certain things, and you realize like regular sex isn't, like, it can't match up to what that is, what you have in your head. So it messes with fantasies. But anyway, to get to my point is, like, I know you probably won't, you know, recommend people like, oh, you know, if you're bored, go, you know, masturbate. But like, are you okay with like if someone just says, hey, I you know, I masturbate to porn, like, are you not, I mean, I don't look like you don't seem like a person that's like a Jehovah's Witness. And it's like, oh my God, please don't do that. But like, is it more like it's like case by case, like you're a person who can't do it, but like, I mean, I don't know. Or do you completely denounce porn for anybody? I don't know. I really don't know what you.
No, so I mean, I appreciate the question, and I'll tell you right now, like, I appreciate your transparency to just like not only ask the question and be willing to dive into it, but, you know, but also sharing where you're at.
Sure.
And
because I don't want you to think I'm judging you, but I also feel like I can. Go ahead.
And likewise, I mean, I because everything I'm like, when we talked the other day, you know, I made it very clear, like my mission right now is I'm just trying to shout from rooftops, like, hey, I was trapped in this addiction. Sure. I didn't think there was a way out. Sure. You know, God put people in my path and showed me that there was a way out, and I'm just trying to share that, you know, with other folks. I'm not here to preach, and I'm really not like trying to convince anyone of anything. I'm not going to pull back from what I believe is the truth, but I'm also not here to preach.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, there's a couple different things there. So number one, I'm definitely not going to hide from the fact that so I mean, I'm a Christian. I absolutely do believe in, you know, sin. I believe that there's you know, there are certain things that are just right and wrong, that are not up to interpretation. It's like, for me, I would put porn in that porn is a wrong thing to do. And there's a spiritual religious element that I don't expect everyone to subscribe to, right? And yet, I guess just the only other thing I'll say there is, so specifically, so like if somebody is a Christian and they're like, well, I don't necessarily know a lot about the Bible, or I don't necessarily understand what makes sin. Like, the reason why would be because it is lust. It is me having sexual thoughts about somebody that is not my spouse. So that's to just give a short response, I mean, that's the from a spiritual Christian angle, that's one part. However, you know, taking the Christian religious part out of it completely, just from a biological perspective, just from just purely scientific, porn, and you hit on part of it, which is, yeah, when I am watching porn, when I am making that a part of my sex life, I am introducing elements that, number one, it's not reality. It is something that I get to pick what I want when I want it. It gives me the illusion of the power and control. It's like, you know, do I want, I mean, not to get, you know, graphic or triggering, but like, do I want a redhead? Do I want a Hispanic woman? Do I want two women? Do I want a drunk woman? Do I want, like, what do I want? When do I want it? Oh, you know what? This isn't hitting it for me anymore. I'm going to go to something else. I'm going to go to a different website. I mean, just, it's basically, it's like, I mean, this is maybe a dumb analogy, but the way I think about it is like a little kid in a giant candy store and just like, what do you want to eat? You want to eat that candy, this candy, this candy, that candy. And that is just, it is not reality. That's not how I'm supposed to feed my body, right? That would not be nutritious. That's not how I need to train my brain. Porn is that, but it's just times a million. Maybe another comparison, I mean, we're getting into the weeds, but I think it's good stuff, is, so like when people talk about, you know, I mean, this could be a touchy subject, but like, screen time for kids, with, you know, the dangers of like a 2-year-old that's got an iPad on their lap and they're like just training themselves to not be bored, right? Yeah. Like how destructive that is. Now, I'm going to raise my hand, right? You can't see me, but like I'm raising my hand like, hey, I struggle with screen time too sometimes. You know, I can get into my phone. But it's like, it's all part of that same principle, which is, as a human, I need to train myself to wait. I need to train myself to not get what I want. I need to train myself that I don't have power and control over exactly what I want when I want. And those are good things to learn. So again, just even from just a human element, even if somebody is an atheist or whatever, I would just encourage somebody, like, really challenge, you know, what is porn serving and what is it potentially robbing you of, I guess would be not necessarily you, but just the collective, right? Like, I would come at it from that perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, I get what it did to you is what it did to you, and you should have every reason why not to indulge in it anymore. But I appreciate your openness about it, because I mean, like, no matter what you say, people are going to do it. And there are a lot of people who can, like I said, there are people who can smoke a joint, and that's just what they do. They do it for chronic pain, or they do it just to get high, and it's not going to impair them in their life. They're just doing it to relax them. They're doing it just because they're bored, whatever. And then also, when you're 12 years old, you're now growing hair, and you're now having erections at a rapid pace. And it's like, what is this? And then all of a sudden you start playing with yourself, and it's like, oh my God, it's the greatest thing in the world. How can I add imagery to this? Oh, I know. And then, well, another thing, like when you're a kid, it's like, you know, you probably don't have any real experience, hopefully not. And so it's like, all this is new. Obviously it could, there's some harm it can do as far as preparing you for what the real thing is like. But like I said, a lot of people do it, and it's just, you know, I think, again, there is a maturity level. I think you should be able to handle it, but I don't think anybody at a certain age, I don't think there's any, it's like drinking. Do you know anybody who's ever, even if you, like, I don't drink, but do you know one person who waited till they were 21 to drink? I don't. Just like, it means sex. I mean, you know people who waited till they were older and stuff like that, but like masturbation or just experience anything, it's very hard to meet somebody. But I like I said, not to get off course here, like I appreciate someone in your shoes to not be so judgmental for the other side, because you've been there, and there are a lot of people that denounce things and immediately just like judge from afar, like, oh, how dare you, like you're sinning, and it's like, yeah, but we all sin one way or another, and it's like, what am I sinning different from yours? I mean, unless you're committing like ultimate, you know, crimes and whatnot, but you know, like I said, a lot of people in your shoes tend to be more judgmental, which that's why I appreciate you and grateful for you, because like I said, I still get it. Like, you still have a mission and you're still not going to promote it, which I get. Like, I don't know who really does promote it, but in general, I appreciate that you're so honest about it, but still open to understand and listen to things, because, again, it did ruin your life, but also you understand that no matter what you do, people are still going to indulge in it. So at least try to educate them in some way, so at least maybe it won't ruin them like it did you.
Well, and that's, part of what you mentioned just like a minute ago is something that I really, as a dad, I've got 4 kids.
Sure.
I really try, and my wife really tries to be intentional about is, we want to teach our kids right and wrong, and we absolutely teach them from a Christian worldview. Like, again, don't hide from that one bit. And yet we don't just say, well, don't do this thing. Well, why, Dad? Well, because the Bible says not to. Well, why is that? Well, I don't know. Just obey it. Like, that's not, in my opinion, that is not good parenting. That is not teaching them discernment. That is not teaching them how to differentiate right from wrong.
Yeah.
Do I believe in God? Do I believe, again, not to be preachy, but like myself, right? Like, do I believe in God? Do I believe in the Bible? Yes. But, I can, like, let me paint the picture for why this is destructive. Let me paint the picture for what this does. And so, whether it's pornography, whether it's stealing, whether it's lying, like, I'm not just going to tell my kid, don't do it just cause. I'm like, well, if you do it, here's what it led to with me. Here's what it's led to with others. Like, if you're going to, like you said, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it. I can't control you from being able to do it, but I'm going to paint for you a picture, of what the possible future would be, and let you kind of discern for yourself. And at the same time, I'm going to be there to talk with you as you walk through life.
Yeah. And you got to be careful too, because when you tell kids not to do something, they're always wanting to know what the other side is like, and they're going to meet kids who are doing the other side, who are on the other side.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times religion, sometimes it has its restriction. And again, I do believe in God, but there's a lot of times religion does push kids away, because it's like, oh, okay, you don't want me to do any of these things, but all my friends are doing it. What is this like? And you got to kind of know. You got to, there's nothing wrong with preaching and saying that God is real and there's a heaven and all that. But if you go too far, you may lose them. And
it can create like this. Yeah, it can create the pinball. I was having a brain fart. It's like this pinball effect. It can be, right, where it's like I'm learning all these things I shouldn't do. And so then whether it's like when I'm a teenager or when I move out of the house or whatever, then it's like, boing, I'm going to go all the way to the other side and do all the things that and to some extent I did, some of that, like that's not blaming it on my parents, not blaming it on my upbringing. But there was an element of like, I want to do all the things that I was told not to do. And like when I shared earlier, there was a lot of love. There was a lot of safety. There was a lot of good stuff in my upbringing. Again, I really do emphasize that, because that's not most households. I know that. And I'm thankful for it, even though I took it for granted as a kid. But there was one piece that I didn't receive as a kid. And I've talked with my parents about this, both individually. I've talked to them about this. But the one thing that they really, I really don't like using the word always and never. Like, I try to really stay away from those words. But I think I can say they never were vulnerable. They never were vulnerable with me and my siblings about the why behind stuff. Like, where did you struggle? What things did you struggle with? What life lessons did you learn the hard way?
You almost want someone to break character after a while. It's like when you see a waitress or a waiter, it's like, okay, I get it. You're trying to get a tip, but like, what makes you you? Like, who are you? Like,
right.
You don't want,
right.
and that, you don't want someone to just be this, like, especially something, a certain time, certain, age gaps and whatnot and generations. A lot of men, it's all about being tough and strong. And it's like, yeah, I get all that, but what do you cry at? And so I get it. There's time, my family's had a lot of tough love in it too. So it's like, man, sometimes it's just like, you just want you to drop your guard. And can we just, we don't need to cry together, but can we just talk about something sensitive that I know that, like, because I know you're a good person, but I also need to feel that you're a good person sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. So, one thing I just wanted to touch on real quick is going back to, kind of how this stuff progressed is I shared about a year after we got married, I shared with my wife that I cheated on her. I shared that I'd had affairs, that I'd had sex with other women. And like at that time, I literally thought that I was done. I literally thought that I was just going to like toggle switch off and not do it anymore. Even though looking back, like that was ludicrous. I had completely trained myself to live this lifestyle and treat women this way and just, you know, do this stuff and just be deceptive and gaslight my wife but I thought that I was going to be done. And so I wrote her this letter and I confessed to her for the first time ever. I confessed that I'd been unfaithful. And then from then on, basically every time I would have another sexual encounter. So again, pornography was pretty constant. Flirting with other women was constant. Sexual texting was pretty constant. But like when I would get to the point of having sexual contact with another woman physically, I would feel so much shame and feel so bad about it. I would confess again. So I confessed multiple times from 2012, because about a year after we got married, which is June 4th, 11. From 2012 through 2015, I confessed a handful of times. And, you know, she just became, you know, more and more broken and more numb, right? Each time I'm just like I'm just stabbing her again and again and again and not living differently, you know, just saying, I'm sorry, I won't do it again. And in 2015 was the first time that she responded differently. And I had another affair and she gave me an ultimatum. She said, if you do not make changes, if you do not get serious help, then I will leave. And we had 3 boys and she was pregnant with our 4th. And like, she had never given me an ultimatum before. And that scared the crap out of me. I did not want to, I had given up any hope of having like a good life, but I didn't want to lose my wife. I didn't want to lose my kids. Because as crazy as it sounds, she and I were still best buddies. Like we were still best friends and we loved doing life together, as like crazy as that probably sounds. And so we loved hanging out together. We loved doing things together. And I didn't want to lose her. I didn't want to lose my kids. So I'm like, I don't freaking know what I'm going to do, but okay, I'll try. And it was still almost a year before I stopped the behaviors, before the porn, before the sexual affairs, before that got cut out. But I started doing some things. I started going to some meetings. I started making some phone calls. I started doing some stuff. And then I got serious about a year later. But just, you know, that, like, I always emphasize that because my wife, like, I'm thankful that she gave us a chance to renew our life, to renew our marriage, to, you know, to have a different life. But I always emphasize to people, like, where she should be applauded is not in her decision to just stick around. Like, I'm thankful she did, but her, you know, the incredible thing that she did was not staying with her abuser. It was standing up to her abuser and saying, I can't control if you continue to hurt me, Logan, but if you do hurt me again in this way, then I'm gone.
Did she ever tell you why she stayed? Besides, I mean, I know she loves you and all. But
yeah. No, I mean, she felt she didn't know what to do, and so she felt trapped. You know, she felt like, well, I can't leave. And she felt like, you know, she needed to be a good wife, and well, I got to stay with him, and, you know, the kids, and, you know, probably a lot of the things that, you know, a woman is going to be feeling it now. And I want to be careful. I'm not trying to throw every single incident of this type of thing happening, whether it's this or a different form of abuse. I mean, there's so many unique factors. So I'm not trying to throw everyone in the same bucket, but right. I would imagine there's a lot of common denominators, right? You know, when a woman is staying with an abuser, there's uniqueness to every situation, but there's also a lot of common denominators. And there's a reason why it happens all the time, right?
Yeah.
And so she, you know, that's what she would tell you now is, you know, she didn't know what to do, but she wanted to be a good wife. And I mean, she even, you know, to your point earlier, like she didn't tell me at the time, but she would share, you know, when we talk about it now, when she shares her testimony now, like she actually, you know, she tried to be more sexually available. You know, she tried to be more sexy, you know, just making sure that I would have no reason to leave, because at that time, you know, she thought that I was cheating because she wasn't good enough, and it was never about her at all.
Yeah. Well, and you got to watch, because, you know, especially, you know, women, a lot of times when you're with somebody and you're not, they're giving you their body and all that, and it's like it's still not good enough. It's like, oh, am I not attractive? Is it because I had kids? Is it because I gained a couple pounds? It could go in many different directions, And in reality, when you have an addiction like this, obviously it's none of the above. It's
Right.
just, you're messed up. But for her, she's got to try to put the pieces together because she doesn't understand what it's like to be you. Because because sex addiction is so taboo in comparison to all the other. I mean, addiction in general is taboo, but especially sex addiction, because a lot of people just think, oh, well, sex is pleasurable, it's great. How can you not have enough?
Right.
And because they can't think of, it's hard to imagine someone, shooting heroin needles in their arms, like in a random like stoop in some, projects. It's hard to think of the equivalent of someone who has a sex addiction who can't stop masturbating to porn or sleeping with random prostitutes and whatnot. Because like I said, sex is pleasurable and it's something that, I don't know. I mean, you kind of need it, but it's not like food or air or water. But
Correct.
it's the next level of things that, like, yes, you desire it. It's something that you really need. But like I said, you can technically go without it, but most people enjoy it. So it's. But like I said, so it's really hard for someone to go, oh, you have an addiction to water? I mean, I guess, but not really. I just like water. Okay, well then that's not a problem.
And that's where, again, I always emphasize that it's not an addiction to sex itself.
Right.
It's an addiction to, for me, is the sexual depravity, the inappropriate sexual behaviors that I had trained myself to chase. Because that's the thing, my wife gave me everything she could, her body, her looks, everything. I mean, incredible mom, everything. But there was one thing she couldn't give me, and that's she couldn't give me new, different, something that's not her. Like literally the only thing she couldn't give me was being somebody other than her. And because I had trained myself to chase different, to chase new, to chase exciting, to chase the risky, like I wasn't chasing after attractive. I wasn't chasing after sexy. That was part of it. I was chasing after attractive plus risky. I was chasing after sexy plus new. And so she couldn't be that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I know that to a smaller degree, but it's like, oh, you're young. All right, let's try it in a movie theater. Let's do it. And then you just start doing, it's like, why? This is so risky. Be like, I don't care. And there's adrenaline rush to it. And then, I think any guy can speak to, regardless of, whatever woman you're with, no matter how attractive, the feeling and the sensation and just the adrenaline rush that you get from a new woman touching on you or kissing you, or just seeing a new woman naked, there is something to it. And so you add that with a sex addiction, it's like, oh my God, like this is the greatest thing in the world. And the reality is, you may not be as attracted to, like, she may be completely not on the same level as your wife, and she may have hairy hands, but you're just like, I don't care. Like, this is just something. Like, this is new. It's different. And the reality is, the sex may be even horrible, but it's not about that. Like you said, it's that feeling that you're just chasing, that high.
Yep, absolutely.
No, so what's it? I mean, I guess I should first start, like, I don't know how to say it. I don't know if sober is the right word, but how long has it been since you've been with another woman and not desired being with another woman?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the differentiation, can't say that word, between those questions, because they're definitely different questions. So yeah, I use the term sobriety date, and that is May 19th, 2016.
Okay.
And that is, abstaining from sexual contact from another woman. That's abstaining from masturbation, pornography, and I will give like like an asterisk on that. That is, seeking out pornography, because again, there are things that, I mean, nowadays, there's things that'll pop up,
right,
on Facebook sometimes. Like, okay, if I was to intentionally seek that out in order to get a high like that, I would classify that as porn. I wasn't trying to find that. I wasn't trying to put that in front of me.
Right.
And I have tools in place to, like, when stuff pops up, like, okay, what am I going to do to deal with this? But yeah, so abstaining from that stuff, abstaining from the sexual deviancy. So, and in terms of, the urges, in terms of the temptations or the desires, I don't know that there will ever be a time where I will have no temptation. I think the answer to that is that there will always be temptation.
Sure.
But where I differentiate is feeling like, so there's a term that, is pretty common in addiction recovery, is like powerless. Like that's part of the 12 steps, is recognize that I have a problem, recognizing that, as they put it, as the 12 steps puts it, I was powerless to stop. And a lot of people hear that, and I'll tell you right now, I used to hear that, and I would really push back on that. I was like, well, hold on, like that sounds like an excuse. That sounds like it's not my fault. I was powerless to stop. And here's how I look at it. I was powerless to stop the urges from being felt. And it felt like I was almost powerless to resist early on. It was like I had gotten myself in a deep, dark cave of addiction. Now, every step that I took leading up to that cave, leading inside that cave, every step I took was my choice individually. And yet, the sum of all those choices had gotten me to a point where I was now inside this cave. And at some point in my life, it's like, holy crap, I'm in this cave and I don't know how to freaking get out. And I don't even know if there is a way out. So both of those things can be true. I'm responsible for my choices, and I was responsible for my choices. And yet, to some degree, it's also accurate to say I was powerless to simply stop, as if it was a toggle switch that I could just hit and just not do it anymore.
Yeah.
And so to respond to your question, like, the desires for the people, there was a point in my addiction, there's a point early on in my recovery where, I don't know if I was like a month or 6 months. I was very early on in sobriety, early on in my recovery program. And I was in line. I was in my car in line for fast food. And I got cars in front of me. I got cars behind me. And for whatever reason, it was kind of like an intrusive thought. I remember having the thought of like, I was kind of, it was kind of a seedy, like not like a seedy part of town, but just not like that, not a super nice area. And the type of area where, in my addiction, where I would see women hitchhiking, and I would evaluate, is this somebody that I could prey on? Is this somebody that would hook up with me? Like that type of thing. Right. So I'm in line at Wendy's, and I remember having the thought, if a naked woman walked up to my car and asked to get in to have sex, like that some people are listening and like, that's ridiculous and that's crazy and that would never happen. I'm telling you right now, I looked for opportunities like that when I was in my addiction. So I had this thought, like, if that happened, oh my gosh, I don't think I could say no. I think I would let her in and we would have sex and I would lose my sobriety, and I guess my wife would leave me. Like, that's where I was. I was sober, but it was like so fragile. I felt like I wouldn't be able to resist something that was that strong.
Yeah.
And I've thought back to that same thought process. I don't remember if it was a year or a couple years later, but like, definitely as I went further down the path of recovery, like, you know what, if that would have happened, or if that happened now, I don't want it to happen. And might I feel temptation? Probably. Yeah. But I wouldn't give in, because it wouldn't be worth it. And I would be strong enough to use my tools. I would pick up the phone and I would call Recovery Brother. I would, hop the curb and drive out of there however I could. I would, if I needed to, I could get out of my car and I would walk inside whatever I would need to do, but I wouldn't have to give in. Whereas, Logan in 2012, 2013, 2014, Logan would have just given in, because I couldn't resist temptation, is how I felt. It wasn't accurate that I could, but that's basically how I acted, right? So I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of how I differentiate the urges,
No, that makes sense. Now, what happens, obviously you're not going to seek out porn, but what happens if you're watching, I don't know, Game of Thrones or something? There's a lot of sex scenes in there. Does that do anything?
Yep. Yeah. So that's a whole other thing, is I'm pretty darn careful about what I watch. Before I watch a movie or a show, I'll look it up. There's different websites, Common Sense Media, Plugged In. I mean, there's different websites that I can look for to see, like, is there sexual content? What does it look like? What does the content look like, but like, what type of content is there? Is it just a joke, or is there an actual sex scene? And so I'm pretty careful what I watch. I love fantasy. I love like medieval stuff and dragons. Like, I've never watched Game of Thrones, and I probably never will, because it's like I've read enough about it. Like, yeah, I'm just not going to do it. Wolf of Wall Street. I love Martin Scorsese. I love DiCaprio. I love that kind of stuff. I've never watched that movie, and I hugely wish I could, in the sense that I love that type of genre. But it's just like, I've read enough about it where I'm like, no, it's just not worth it. I'm not going to put that in front of me. Not because I would be afraid that I would watch it and then like, oh my gosh, I have to masturbate right now. But it's more of, I don't need to be putting that crap in my brain anymore. Like I've gone so long not putting that in my brain. I don't need to put it in my brain again.
Yeah, it's kind of like,
I don't need to put it in front of my eyes.
It's kind of like an alcoholic saying, yeah, I just don't want to go to a restaurant that has a bar. You probably won't drink, but you just don't even want to be tempted by it, or even to get it in your head to say, oh, there's those clinking glasses over there.
Yep. Well, and what it does is, again, it's levels. Like early on in my recovery, it's more of like, okay, I'm not going to watch that show or that movie because it might be so tempting that I might masturbate that night. Like early on, it's more of that process. It's not that anymore. I'm not worried that I'm going to watch it and then boom, now I'm going to, but it's like, every image that I put in my brain that I shouldn't be looking at, every thought that I allow myself to dwell on that's inappropriate, it's like one layer of stuff that I just don't need in my life. It's just one more brick in a wall that I don't want to build. So like each individual thing by itself, maybe not that big of a deal.
Sure.
And I have tools to deal with those things on a case by case basis. Because again, like we're talking about, I mean, I'm on Facebook, like I use Reddit for stuff. Like there's, I'm careful about how I use it, but there's crap on there. So I'm going to have stuff pop in front of me, even if I'm not looking for it. And I have tools to deal with it. But what I don't want to do is just willy-nilly watch whatever I want, use whatever social media, however I want, and just like have no boundaries to where I'm just getting flooded with stuff. Cause then erosion happens, erosion in healthy thinking. Erosion in healthy routines.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, it makes sense, and I try to leave no stone unturned, if you will, like, because this is something, because it is taboo, and because a lot of people don't understand. Because I think this will help people question kind of where they're at, and to understand it. I think it's weird because we are in this like sexualized society now, but we still kind of make porn and sex taboo, where it's like it's surprising that all you see on cable is shadows, because HBO forever has been showing whatever they want, and they have every right to. But it's weird because sometimes we still try to act like we're not that sexualized, but then every song on the radio is something about oral sex or shaking their ass or something. So it's like, okay, well, so at least we should educate people on what this is, and not as a joke, because there's we give sex education and all that, and we talk about STDs and all that, and that's all great, and we should, but also we should understand there's another repercussion that could come from sex, and it's not just STDs, it's not just pregnancy, it's also you could potentially become addicted, and now, again, like I said, it's not majority of people don't, but it happens enough, and it's pretty frequent, and there's a lot of people that struggle and suffer from it, and I think we write people off so easily in this world, where it's like anybody who's a little different, and I think we talked about that the other day, where it's like anybody who's just a little different, we go, oh my God, what a weirdo, or what, oh, he's a serial killer, he's dead, and it's like, no, man, like, we got to stop acting like people don't masturbate, we got to stop acting like porn isn't a thing. And we got to stop acting like people don't have sex at a crazy rate. So it's like, okay, so we know these things happen. All right, well, there's always an abuse of power. There's always a way that this can go a different way. Even if it's not the normal, it still can happen. So we can't just write it off. And I think it's really good to talk about every single angle, because, like I said, there's people out there that may be struggling with it and don't even think that they have this problem, just because, whatever, it's a cultural difference or whatever, however they were brought up, like, no, maybe they were brought up like you, like have a good family and, maybe a little religious, but they're just like, there's no way this could happen to me. And reality is they're out there doing really ridiculous things just to get that thrill and to have an orgasm. So, so no, I appreciate you being so open.
kind of wrapping up here, but I mean, you can add whatever you want at the end here, but like, so are, you know, I obviously, like I said, once you're an addict, you're kind of always an addict, but are you the way you are now? I mean, you're going on your 8-year anniversary, and honestly, congratulations.
Thank you.
What is it like now to, like, obviously I'm sure your wife is a lot happier, but what's it like to now just be satisfied and be with one woman? I mean, obviously I know you probably get a couple urges every so often, but now that this is your life now, like, do you deep down, do you feel content?
100%. And that's not me trying to
No, no,
put on
no.
a face. Like man, I cannot emphasize enough how incredible it is to be able to be just completely focused and locked in. Because again, I never knew this, never had this before, and to be able to just completely focus on how much I love my wife and how thankful I am for her, and not be comparing her, you know, it's this is kind of a crude example, but I feel like it's a good one. I mean, it's kind of like, like, you know, my loving my wife or giving her attention is, you know, water out of a garden hose. And before, I was taking a steak knife and just jamming holes all throughout. And it's like, I got a little bit of love for you. I got a little bit of attention, but most of it's going all these a million other places.
Right.
And now I get to completely focus my love and my attention on her. And, you know, whether it's sexual attention, whether it's just emotional intimacy, whether it's conversation, you know, time, whatever. It's like, you are it. And it's just complete focus. And it bleeds into every other area of life, you know. Because it helps us build our relationship. It helps us build our intimacy. So it helps us be better parents. It helps us work together as teammates, and, you know, work together in ministry, and just, it's an incredible thing. Like I said, we were best buddies before. We really were, but my goodness, I mean, to try to be best friends and yet trying to, like, block out all the crap that I've got going on in the other 95% of my life, that's a really bad way to live. Like, we were not designed to compartmentalize our lives and have, like, addict life, and then here's dad life, and here's husband life, and then there's, like, when I try to compartmentalize and, like, block out all the parts that are crappy about me that I don't like, but I'm just going to ignore them.
Sure.
That's really destructive for my brain. It's really destructive for, you know, mental health. So now to just be raw, to just be real, like, yeah, I'm not perfect. Not a perfect dad, not a perfect husband, not a perfect man.
Yeah.
But I'm freaking working on stuff, and I'm not ignoring my tendencies. I'm not ignoring the parts of me that need work.
Yeah.
It's a really beautiful thing. I want to share one thing.
Sure.
Like, I guess just a couple quick things. So, like, obviously, like, right, you know, I'm on this podcast. I can share, you know, my perspective. My wife does at some point. She's open to the idea of getting on podcasts, and I look forward to it, because, like, I want her to be able to share her story and her side of things. Just from a time and energy bandwidth perspective, she's like, not right now. But,
Right.
you know, but again, like, I mean, we've talked so many times. We lead groups together now. She has shared her testimony individually with me. Like, so what I'm about to say, I mean, it is from her perspective, even though you're hearing it from my voice.
Yeah.
So shortly after I got into recovery, which I first attended a meeting that had, like, real transformation, real healing. Like, there were like 10 guys that had my story, that had years of sobriety, years of healthy living, years of transformed life. That was March of 2016, the first time I went to a meeting like that. It was called Prodigals. And so I lead a meeting. It's a Prodigals meeting now where I live now. Like, that was the first time God gave me hope. He showed me, like, okay, there's a way out. Well, and then I got sober a couple months later. She got into recovery a couple months after that, July of 2016. There was a meeting called Partners in Process, and it's for women who have been harmed in this way, that have been abused by sexual betrayal and all the lies, the manipulation, everything I had put her through, and just the trauma of having somebody continually cheat on you.
Mm.
I mean, what I struggled with is, you can say it's marginalized, and it definitely is. I would say what she went through on, you know, because of my actions, is even more marginalized. Like people just don't talk about it. People don't even know how harmful that is for a woman to go through that. And so a lot of women who have been hurt by this, even if a man works on himself and gets healthy and gets clean, it's pretty common for a woman to be like, well, dude, that's your problem. Like, you cheated on me. I didn't cheat on us. I don't need to go to meetings. I don't need to do homework. I don't need to, like, why would I need to do all this extra work? That's something that you did. And it's really tricky because it's not the woman's fault one bit.
Yeah. And
yet it's like, if somebody walks up to you on the street and stabs you and then they run off, is it your fault you got stabbed? 100% not. However, if you can do whatever you need to do to get medical attention, whether that's calling a cab or walking or get different, like, is it on? I mean, should you go get medical help? Absolutely, you should. And so it's not her fault that I did this. It's not her fault that she went through this. And yet it would behoove her to go get help. And so she did. She went and she got into recovery to work through all of this. And she's never looked back. I've never looked back on mine. And so, so she now leads a women's group for this, and I lead a men's group. So I lead the prodigals, and she leads the partners in process out in the city where we live, which is an hour north of Anchorage. And that's been huge because it's one thing for a guy, to get clean. It's one thing for a guy to work on himself. That's a beautiful thing. And yet I've seen men, I have some close friends that have been through this process recovery wise, and their wives have just, they've never decided to buy into their own recovery. And I understand why logically, where they're like, it's not my problem. I shouldn't have to deal with it. Yeah. And yet it breaks my heart because they're a shell of themselves, because I mean, they're literally like somebody that has a knife wound that they've just let star over and just become this thing that they've never attended to. And it's tough. So that's one piece. It's just that, when a woman has been hurt like this, it's not her fault, right. But like, please get help. And there are resources. But the last thing I'll just put out there is, we shared our testimony, about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So like I lead my men's group, she leads the women's group. They're separate groups. We don't meet together. We work on our stuff, separately. But for one night, we had everyone sit together and we went through some recovery stuff together as one joint group. And we shared some of our story, so that way the women could hear from my side and the guys could hear from her side, that kind of thing. And we were working on our testimony the night before. Like we'd written it before, but we were, making some edits and kind of polishing up some of the stuff and updating some of the dates that we're referencing and things. And we're sitting on our couch. We're like snuggled up on the couch and we've got these sheets of paper in front of us. And she was going over this paragraph where she's detailing, I think it was 2014, and I had confessed another affair to her. And on this paper, in this episode of our life, she's sharing how, she was laying on, and I remember this vividly. She remembers it vividly. She was laying on the bathroom floor, screaming, just like screaming, crying out to God, screaming at me, screaming at the air, just like in so much pain that like, this is just not stopping. It's just getting worse. And I mean, talk about, a horror story. Like this was it. And this was that part of our testimony. She was sharing that part. And she looks at me, she's like, well, okay, so at this one part, there's a period. Should it be like a semicolon? So it's just like a full sentence. And like, we're debating, the grammar of it. And I really do believe like God allowed me to just like zoom back in that moment. And like, it almost like seeing us like out of body experience. Like we're sitting here debating the grammar of this paragraph of what should be a complete like marriage ending, life altering, well, it was life altering, but life ending story. Right. And yet we're able to sit here and talk about it and work through it and figure out whether or not it's a period or a semicolon, not because we're pretending it didn't exist, not because it doesn't matter or because she's just going to forget about it. But it's like, no, because by God's grace, like we did the work to work through it, to not be trapped, me in my addiction. And then for her to not be trapped in the pain and the trauma of, that constant cycle of what I did to her. So I share that just to give, again, especially if there's folks that maybe are in this, like just to give a glimpse of, there is a future out there that makes no logical sense if people are willing to do the work. It makes no logical sense that I should be able to go home to my wife tonight and just fully embrace her, like physically and emotionally and otherwise. That I should be able to go home tonight and give my kids a kiss on the cheek and tuck them into bed. Like, I should have signed all that away, and yet I was given a chance to have a different life. And again, that's why I'm here trying to shout on rooftops. It's just,
no, I appreciate it, buddy.
There's a different way out,
No, I appreciate it. Do you have anything to promote? I don't remember if you did or not.
I don't. Like I said, I'm here to just share. This is available. Yep. I can give you an email. You can put it in the show notes. Okay. If folks want to, if they have a question, they want to reach out, they can.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not selling a book or a course or anything like that. I'm just trying to share what, what is out there if people are willing to do the work.
I think that'd be interesting, though, if you and your wife either did a podcast or YouTube channel or you made a book together or something, because that would be very interesting, I think, and you get both perspectives and maybe on your 10-year anniversary. I don't know. But yeah, either way, but I appreciate you for coming on. Please keep in touch. I want to, like I said, want to stay friends, and I'm happy that, everything's working out for you, and keep doing what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, TJ.
Anytime, brother.
Take care.
All right, guys, I'm getting out of here. I got to go to the gym here in about 20 minutes. Grandma's about to drop something off for me, so I got to go grab that. But I hope this was interesting for you guys. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I know it is taboo. I know it is something that kind of gets people like, oh, we're talking about this. It is what it is, man. It's a real problem out here for a lot of people. And just because maybe you don't fully understand it doesn't mean you shouldn't learn about it. I'm very interested and very curious, and I've always been somewhat of a sexual person. But also I'm also just open to different things, and I've always never shied away from, what is taboo or whatever. Because maybe something is not my thing doesn't mean I don't want to educate myself and don't want to learn about it, because there might be somebody I bump into that it may help. And if you have a little bit of information at your disposal, it's like, when you go out and it's like, man, somebody's like, man, I wish I had a pen. You just pull out a pen. You're like, here, I got a pen. Like, if you had just some random information, like a tool, you just pull it out and go, oh, I know that. I got you right here. Boom. Now, obviously, you have your phone in your pocket, so you have, infinite information at your disposal. But regardless, it's always nice to know something. It's always nice to feel smart. And it's just good to not be judgmental and understand what someone could possibly be going through. Even if you don't fully understand and it's not your story, it's not your pain, it's good to know. And I think it's easier to understand it when you've been through your own version of pain. And you've jumped over, can't speak today, many triumphs and many battles with yourself and your demons. So anyway, I'm getting out of here. Thank you guys for being on this journey. We'll be back next week as always. Thanks everyone. Appreciate your support. And I've gotten more feedback lately, and it's nice to hear from you guys. And even whether I know you or not, it's real. I'm very grateful and humble that you guys care enough to listen to the show. Again, you want to get a hold of me personally, My Blurred Opinion at TikTok or Instagram. Just reach out. I will talk to you. Whether you want to be on the show, you need a friend, you just need someone to blow some steam off, you need someone to curse out. I don't care. Just warn me ahead of time. All right? But yeah, I'll see you next week. Appreciate you, and take care, everyone. Oh, that was not the outro music, TJ. You bumped it. The mic was in my view, and I could not see it. So let's try this. Take two. Oh, and I'm leaving that in there. I'm not editing that bullshit out. Take all that time to edit it out just for 5 seconds, not even. No. I should now just edit this whole part out, but no, we don't do that. This is the lazy studios. This is, my co-host is a cat. and he sleeps during the podcast. And you want me to edit? Hell no. All right, guys. Here, let's try this again. See you next week.